But anyway, further ado, I've got this fella on. It's Eric Shelmerdine. We'll be talking music, as I said. And he's a great fella. He is. Everything. He's written a book. I can't put my hands on it at the moment. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's like an encyclopedia. And it's under my chair because the leg fell off the chair. It's that thick, you see. So it's keeping the chair level. No, it's not. Only joking. Derek could kill me. There he is. Don't say that. I said that. Hi, Derek.
Hi, Frank. Good to see the book's coming in useful, mate.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? What I said?
Absolutely. Not a problem.
Oh, that's brilliant. I just want to thank my sponsors, Gap Painting Services, for sponsoring the Frank Carlyle show. And Gap Services, Painting Services, are A1. They really are A1. All time served lads, fully insured, clean and tidy. If you're a OAP, special discount, and I mean a special discount. If you're an NHS worker, special discount. But even if you're not one of those, very reasonable prices, whatever you want to, whether it's exterior or interior. Gap Painting Services. The number to get hold of them will always be up on our show. Anyway, it's going over to Derek now. Hiya, Derek.
Hi, Frank.
You're okay. So what are we talking about? Just in case people don't know what we're talking about.
Well, we're going to be taking a look today, really, at one of the true sort of maestros of the rock and roll world, Roy Wood. Multi-instrumentalist, wrote just about everything he ever recorded. Responsible for bands like The Move, ELO, and Wizzard. I mean, each of them in their own right, absolutely pieces of rock and roll history. And we'll look at ELO, which is probably the best known of those three bands to most of the people listening to this. He moved on after the first album. He was not with them for very long, but the history of how they came about is absolutely fascinating. We'll get to that. And what's interesting as well is how it all sort of started. He was born on the 8th of November, 46 in Birmingham, Kitts Green area. The drums were actually the first instrument he learned to play. And it's the only instrument he's never had any tuition in. And he picked up the guitar after seeing the Shadows play a gig at the Birmingham Town Hall. He was about 12 years old. And Hank Marvin inspired him. Hank Marvin, I think, is one of those real unsung heroes of British rock and roll. In the 50s, the Shadows, Cliff Richard, very, very cool. And then he became more of a sort of family entertainer. And I think people like Hank Marvin and the rest of the Shadows are really quite underestimated for the musicians that they are. Roy Wood formed his first band, the Falcons, when he was 12 years old in about 1958. And he was 63 when he had his first professional band. And that was a band called Jerry Levine and the Avengers. And he left that before they split up because he didn't like the idea of there being two lead guitarists. The one thing about rock and roll bands is, you've got plenty of egos and guitarists are usually in the front row. Nothing against guitarists, guys. But, he didn't like the idea of two lead guitars. So he reformed the Falcons for a while in sort of 63. And then he joined a band sort of May 64 called Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders. Now, they were a well-established band at that time. They'd already released a couple of singles. And he'd also written a lot of material by then. There's a guy called Pete Frame who's famous for putting family histories together of bands. And if you look at the sort of family history of Mike Sheridan, Pete Frame, he says he'd already written a big pile of songs. That's the thing about Roy Wood. He wasn't just a musician. And then he recorded his first ever single with Mike Sheridan in the November of 64. And what happened then was we get to the start of it all, really, the start of the story with the Move. And they formed essentially from three major, very successful local Liverpool bands. So Liverpool was very much like Liverpool at the time. It had very much a close-knit community of bands, and all the guys knew each other. Most of them jammed with each other. And what happened, Roy Wood came from Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders. And then three of the guys came from Carl Wayne and the Vikings. And that was lead vocalist Carl Wayne, Chris Ace the Face, who apparently very good looking and got this nickname Ace the Face. Kefford, he was a bass player, sang a bit as well. And Bev Bevan, the drummer, he was also with Carl Wayne and the Vikings. And the quintet was sort of completed with Trevor Burton from another well-known band at the time, Danny King and the Mayfair Set. So they became effectively a Birmingham supergroup. But what's really quite interesting is how they came about. Davy Jones and the Lower Third had played there. Davy Jones, of course, being David Bowie very shortly afterwards. And he'd seen Trevor Burton and Ace Kefford play. And David Bowie was chatting to them at a gig in Birmingham and suggested that, they ought to think about putting a band together themselves. And they thought, that sounds like an interesting idea. And Roy Wood was the first one that they asked. So the three of them then were looking for a couple more to complete it. And the first drummer they asked, believe it or not, was John Bonham, who went on to fame with Led Zeppelin. This was before he joined Robert Plant and the band of Joy. He was in a local Brummie group called The Way of Life. But for whatever reason, he decided that the move wasn't for them. And when they put the move together, what they were looking to do was sort of create the sound of the Who that was very popular, because the whole mod thing was quite popular at the time. A lot of the music they were playing at that time was in that sort of idiom, as it were. So they put the band together and played their first gig on the 23rd of January, 1966 at the Belfry Hotel in Stourbridge. But it's interesting how people like David Bowie crop up all the time in sort of rock and roll stories. I mean, he saved Mott the Hoople from the scrap heap. They were just about to give up. He persuaded them to get back together. Yeah, they played this disastrous gig in Switzerland, Zurich, I think it was. And they even had a B-side out there.
It's surprising me about Bowie, actually, when you're saying he was always there or thereabouts, as these bands were forming together. I didn't know that. But, getting back to the move, I'll just say this. When you see Roy Wood in the move, Goodbye Blackberry Way, that's unmistakably move, isn't it? That's
absolutely.
But you see the style, the hairstyle and the little moustache and everything else. Then you go on a few years later and you see him in Wizzard, totally different.
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking about Roy Wood. I mean, he just kept changing all the time. I mean,
what I was going to say was the way he changed his style, his appearance. Is it because of the way he was changing the bands that he wanted to fit into their style? Like ELO, for example. He changed again. The Wizzard, completely changed. So each time the band, he changed his whole appearance. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, no, absolutely. And the whole musical content, when we get to ELO in a couple of minutes, the whole philosophy behind ELO was fundamentally different. The idea behind the move was to be a successful mod band in the sort of ilk of the Who. And they were very successful. I mean, they had the first hits single at the end of 1967, Night of Fear. And that was a number 2. To get your first single in at number 2 is pretty good going. And then they had a string of hits across 1967 and 1968. I Can Hear the Grass Grow, Flowers in the Rain, Fire Brigade, Blackberry Way. And then when it got to 1968, Blackberry Way, that was their only number 1, funnily enough. That was their 5th hit single, the end of the Christmas period of 68. And then, funny enough, the first one that wasn't a top 10 was their follow-up to that, a track called Curly, that's not really all that well known, I don't think. And after that, the hits weren't as prevalent. And what happened was, though, that they kept on having hits, and that was a bit of a problem for them, because what they decided was that around 1970, they decided that what happened was that Jeff Lynne joined them. Carl Wayne moved on. I mean, at the sort of end of the 60s, other people were moving on. And they decided they'd form ELO.
Well, why do you think, Electric Light Orchestra? Can I just mention the names here? That's just changing. I'm sorry, but think about this. Like the name Electric Light Orchestra and why they had that particular name. Can you, elaborate on that? Just after just read these comments out. Evening, Frank. Hope you're well. I'm back home now, says Mark Kiddish. Tony Barton. Hello, Frankie. Hope all's well and everyone watching. And a pint and a thumbs up for me. Frank, hope you like the songs I sent to you last night, me singing at my cousin's studio. Very good, Mark. Yeah, I listened to them. And the first one was a Beatlish one. And the other one, Hey Jude, very good. I was quite surprised. I should have messaged you, but my phone's been all funny and everything, to be honest. Evening, Derek, says Mark Kinnish.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, Derek, says Tony Barton, and there's a pint for you and a thumbs up.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
It's not bad, is it?
Never go wrong with a pint.
And Neil Broderick says, bank holiday evening, everyone, and the weather didn't disappoint. And he says, Derek, I bought a vinyl album on Saturday, Little Feet, inverted commas, Salon Shoes. I was told Waiting for Columbus was voted one of the best live albums of all time. And he carries on by saying, the Yardbirds have some lineup as well. Evening, Frank, Derek. Sorry, I'm late on parade, says Charlie Cairns. And Ray Smith says, Bev Bevan went on to form ELO with Jeff Lynne. Great band from the Midlands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the move had an awful lot of success and some interesting landmarks as well. I mean, their Flowers in the Rain was the first single ever played by Tony Blackburn on Radio 1. And he was also sued for that particular song because by Harold Wilson, the then Prime Minister, because when they promoted it, they had this a promotional postcard that sort of depicted a cartoon Harold Wilson in a sort of romantic liaison. And there were rumours at the time of affairs. I mean, we won't really go into that in case there's any Wilson's lawyers listening. But anyway, Harold Wilson took them to court. He won his lawsuit, and it ended. And they ended up paying the proceeds ever on of Flowers in the Rain to two charities, the Stoke Mandeville Hospital and what at that time was called the Spastics Society. So that would have cost him a lot of money if you think of the royalties, because he had the writing royalties as well, which I dare say would have been part of that particular deal. And they also played a couple of very major concerts in '67. There was one called the 14-Hour Technicolor Dream in London, the Ali Pali, about 10,000 people. And it was one of the real sort of landmarks of the Summer of Love. What happened? The International Times, a sort of equivalent of American Rolling Stone. It was about politics and music, and they were facing some prosecution and needed some money for defence. And I love the flyer describes the concert as London's own hip newspaper. The International Times presents giant benefit 14-hour Technicolor Dream. 30 top groups, kaleidoscopic colour, beautiful people, followed by a be-in on Sunday. Tickets £1. And what do you get for your £1? You get 2 stages, mixed media happening. These are all wonderful 60s words. And a sort of mixture of light shows, music and poetry. And who did you see for a pound that evening? Well, Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett. This is only a handful of the 30 top groups. Crazy World of Arthur Brown, you know, The Fire, with the hat that burns him from time to time. The Move were there, which is why this story's in here. Alexis Corner and Graham Bond, 2 of the absolute godfathers of British blues. Yoko Ono was there, actually, before she really met John. She was doing a poetry reading. The Pretty Things, The Soft Machine, The Creation, another really good mod band that never really, they had a couple of great hit singles, Making Time and Painter Man. They were minor hits. John's Children, and that was the time when their guitarist was Mark Bolan. He was with them for a brief period. And apparently Pink Floyd were playing as the dawn broke. So that would have been quite a pound's worth, I think, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a bit. Do you know what, Eric? Well, you can say this off your head. I met her. I was in town one day, just in town. I did some shopping, and I'm going back about 6 or 7 years ago. Anyway, I bumped into this lad. You know, an old mate of mine who going back years, used to go for drinks. And we were chatting, and he said, I don't know how it came up, but Glastonbury came up. And he said, do you remember going down there? I said, yeah, I do, actually. He said, did you know that was the very first Glastonbury? I said, right. So I was at the very first Glastonbury. Wow. But you know what? I don't know who was on. So the next time, will you look us up to see who was on? Not now. I mean, when you come back in a week or 2, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I just forget.
Yeah, I remember Mark Bolan was actually there.
Someone said to me, someone said, you know, I was chatting, and I said, I don't know who was on. And was your stones out your head? I said, no, I never jumped on. I wasn't stones. She's completely forgot. Because they're the things like you seem to forget, you know. Whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Artie Davis. Artie. Hi, Frank. Not being able to tune in for a while after I did the Isle of Wight Festival to 60,000 odd. Wow. I was in the middle of forming a band, and I was on my way home and fell out of my wheelchair, smashing my hip and knee. Had a few ups. While I was in hospital also, in bed at home with carers, I lost 9 stone. I still can't play drums with leg pain and weakness. Oh
dear.
Oh, that's it. I didn't even know anything about that. Oh, well, I'm so sorry. So sorry, just get better, you know, because Artie Davis. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. And Neil Broderick says Jeff Lynne produced Roy Orbison, the Travelling Wilburys, Tom Petty. He's brilliant. And Brian Edley. All right, lads, hope you don't mind me joining in for a while. I won't mention footy. How's the form, Derek? And Neil Broderick finishes up by saying the original headline acts were the Kinks and Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, but these acts were replaced at short notice by T-Rex, later known as T-Rex. He says Tyrannosaurus. Tickets were £1. Other build acts of note were Steam Hammer, Quintessence, Stackridge, Al Stewart, Pink Fairies, and Keith Christmas. No wonder I didn't remember anything. But I mentioned the first, the very first. It's great, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, he was actually inspired. He'd been to the Bath Blues Festival, and he was inspired by that. I think it might have been one of the ones that Led Zeppelin played at, and he thought, oh, I'll have a bit of that. So that was when, the sort of following summer, he decided to turn his farm into a concert venue. and it's certainly never looked back since.
Wow, it just shows you, doesn't it? You know, like if you've got a bit of land, and all of a sudden you can advertise, oh, I've got something on. Well, do you know what? A mate of mine's, he's tunes in, but he's tunes in. Do you know where he's tunes in from? The Dominican Republic.
Brilliant.
In Malone. He's tunes in from the Dominican Republic. Yeah, but you know, it's strange, isn't it? The way you know, people had the idea of gathering, you know, a couple of bands, whatever they were, or whoever they were, put them on stage, make a stage, make a podium, and then bring in the crowds, and that's how it takes off. Do you think Woodstock started it all off, Derek?
Well, Monterey was a couple of years earlier in '67.
Yeah,
I mean, that technically wasn't the first festival. There was one about 2 weeks earlier, just outside San Francisco, Magic Mountain Festival. But I mean, Monterey was the one that really started the ball rolling. I mean, that was the one where the Who and Hendrix were both there, and that's what broke them basically in America. And famously, both refused to follow each other on because they'd both seen each other's stage acts with, you know, the Who wrecking their equipment, kicking drums around, and Hendrix setting fire to his guitar. So neither really wanted to be following that. So a toss of the coin, put the Who on first. So Jimi Hendrix went out, did a blazing version of Wild Thing, set his guitar alight to that. Now, this is the first time the Americans had seen anything like this. He smashed his guitar into the stage until the arm broke off, and he threw the arm into the audience. Now, that is a piece of rock and roll memorabilia to have hanging on your wall. It really is.
Yeah, though, I wonder, you know, how many hands has it passed through since?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, everything is there's a price on everything, isn't there? Yeah. And it goes up each like year or whatever, and then there's offers that come in as well. Yeah. So this is how things, you know, in price that is. Yeah. And I'm not talking about inflation either. I'm talking about the memorabilia that's so important, especially in rock. You've only got to look at. He says here, the famous Beatles song, Age Years, wasn't meant to be for John Lennon's son, Jules. Then they changed it. I'll get back to you on that. Derek, me and the wife, this is Neil Broderick, went to one of the biggest blues festivals in the world. We were just walking past Lincoln Park in Chicago and heard the music, so we went to investigate. Later that night, we ended up in Buddy Guy's nightclub.
Wow.
So, do you know anything about that?
Lincoln Park? I don't know too much about that particular festival. But
do you know anything about Lincoln Park? And
yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's a regular one. I'm not really too sure, to be honest. But I mean, so many great blues guitar. What's interesting as well is the American blues stars, the really big ones like, you know, Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry. They really have a lot to thank the British invasion for, and the Mersey Beat and, you know, R&B groups of the early '60s. Because what they did, they were the ones that actually popularized all of that early blues and R&B. Yeah. And, you know, people like Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters would be the support act for people like the Rolling Stones when they were on tour in America. So, you know, it real coals to Newcastle, and it really revitalized the whole blues industry and a lot of American bands as well. But, you know, it was rock and roll that very much, it's a sort of turned full circle. You know, rock and roll owes a great debt to R&B and blues. And it was the very fact that the rock and roll reintroduced it all that helped the original blues guys find the international fame that they so richly deserved. I think that's a nice side to this, the sort of the whole story of this sort of music. How each generation has helped the other one way or another.
Yeah, there are things that you'll never ever forget.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
as I said about that Glastonbury.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice the first, I'm being honest. And as I said, I didn't know any of the bands at all. I didn't know we were wrong until it came out there. Anyway, Phil Lynott was brought up in Dublin. That's Brian Edley. And Shane McGowan says, evening, met a big pint. And Mark Kinnish says, Derek, did you like 10538 Overture by ELO? Both Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne sang together on it. I think it was from around 1970.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's interesting that, because we're at the part of the story now where the move is fading away. I mean, Ace Kefford left in 68, then Trevor Burton in 69, and when Carl Wayne left in 70, that was really when the whole ELO concept started to come together. Because what happened was that Jeff Lynne then joined them. He'd been back in the sort of Idle Race days, the original band that Roy Wood had come from, became the Idle Race, one of those very popular bands that never really made massive commercial success. But he joined Roy Wood, and they decided that they'd form what became the Electric Light Orchestra. And you were talking about how the name came about. And I think very much the word orchestra is the key word in those three, because the vision, Roy Wood's vision, very much was to carry on where the Beatles, particularly Sgt Pepper, had left off. And they wanted to introduce orchestral instruments as the main instruments, like ahead of the guitar, essentially, in the keyboards. And he very much wanted, it was a fusion. The idea was very much, as that first single suggests, and the second single, Wrote Over Beethoven, was a sort of fusion of pop music and classical music. And the idea, what Roy Wood was very keen to do, was to take the recording studio out onto the stage, as it were. Because, I mean, people like the Beatles and Stones, lots of people had strings and various orchestral backing on the records. And he wanted to actually put that front of stage, as it were, and even make that the focus of the act. And the idea was to transition. This is like the beginning of 1970. The idea was to transition fairly smoothly then from the move into ELO. But the problem they had is the move wouldn't go away. They kept on having hit records up to 1972. And I mean, they started recording what became their first album in the sort of summer of 1970. And that sort of went into, they're still recording, we're getting into 1971 and well into 1971. And they didn't play, the ELO didn't play its first gig until the 16th of April, 1972, which was actually 6 months after the album was released. I mean, it was actually released on the 3rd of December, 71, but it didn't chart in the UK until August 72. They weren't touring, they weren't playing, they weren't doing radio promos for it. So it shows the importance then basically of live performance to promote the albums. And this is now, you've got the core members now of what were ELO and The Move, and that was Roy Wood, Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan. And they basically moved forward with that. But there's a great story about the release of that album in America. And what happened was the American office rang
the first album. Was this the first?
This is the first ELO album, called Electric Light Orchestra. Yeah. And apparently the American record office rang the British counterpart, record people, and they didn't get nobody answered the phone. So the guy reported back to his superiors, because what they were looking for, the question he wanted to ask was, what's the name of the album? So he went back and reported to his betters in the marketing department, and he said, look, I rang the Brits and no answer, meaning nobody answered the telephone. But the marketing people thought he meant the name of the album was No Answer. So that's what it was released as in America. I don't know if that's apocryphal, but it's a great story. And I can believe it. I can believe a simple communication like that.
Oh, yeah.
I rang them and no answer. You know, you're having one conversation, the guy listening's having a completely different conversation. He takes it in and says, oh, that's an interesting title.
Good, that is good. That's a nice little story.
Yeah.
So, like, let's move on now. Right, so we've got ELO. We've got, they're still going today. Funny enough, I was listening to Don't Bring Me Down today. The video. Absolutely, and rock and roll is king. I was actually watching them, on video today. They're just a tremendous band, because I keep saying this. I always liked ELO, Status Quo, and Rainbow.
Yeah.
And they were brilliant for me, anyway,
Oh, absolutely.
As I said, I was playing them today.
Yeah.
And nothing changes. Still like the music. It's I think it lives with us forever. And as Neil Broderick says, Jeff Beck, after the Yardbirds, could have played and was probably asked to play in all the big British bands.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. Absolutely. And their brother carries on. He says, Strange Magic is about Trevor Francis, who was a footballer.
Yeah.
And he was a very good footballer, Strange Magic, which is good, in some things. But anyway, can we go to the transformation, where he leaves now, ELO, and all of a sudden he's changed image again, and then Wizzard.
Absolutely, and it's a fascinating story how that came about. He moved on from ELO after the first album. I mean, it doesn't sound as if he was there long, but I mean that was like 2 years while they were putting it together. Because I mean, if you look at the moves, last hit was California Man, and that was May '72. So ELO played their first gig in the April of '72. So it's really quite you wouldn't believe it if there was a movie about it. You'd think, oh, that's a little bit contrived. But what happened was how Wizzard came about was that he left ELO. Apparently somebody rang him or rang his office and said, would he like to play in a rock and roll extravaganza at Wembley? Well, the answer is going to be yes, isn't it? But his problem, of course, is he didn't have a band. So what he did, he got a bunch of mates together, basically, and they formed Wizzard. And I saw one wonderful quote when he was talking about this in an interview. And it says words to the effect of, Roy Wood thought, oh, okay, Phil Spector, UK Wall of Sound. And if you think of, where he'd just come from, like creating an electric orchestra, basically, with ELO. And then Wizzard, I mean, that was quite a band as well. And, if you think about the Wizzard songs, they do have that sort of Spector-esque Wall of sound about them. And he did that. And that gig was on the 5th of August, '72. I think it was called the Rock'n'Roll Festival at Wembley. And the lineup, and who wouldn't want to play in this lineup, was Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bill Haley, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley. I mean, what a line. You wouldn't see them for a pound. But
absolutely.
What a great lineup. So, you know, it's no wonder that his answer to the question was yes. And it generated Wizzard. So it's fascinating. You look at those three bands he's in and how they came about. I mean, the first one was a thought process inspired from a conversation with David Bowie. And you got Electric Light Orchestra when they wanted to completely revolutionize and fuse classical music, not in a prog rock way, but in much more of a classical music way with pop music.
Well, I think you gave the hint there about Sgt Pepper's.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, Roy Wood must have thought, mustn't he? This is way beyond us now. Rather than just playing, you know, a guitar and banging on drums, you know, this is totally different. So that must have inspired them, must have done.
Yeah.
And look what we've got today. Absolutely brilliant. Is ELO still going? Are they still you know going or what? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of jumping forward then. Yeah, I mean, basically, he's been recording, writing, producing, and performing ever since. I did check if he's on the road at the moment, but his website says no gigs. Well, there are no gigs listed. But when I was checking in 2018, he was on tour as the Roy Wood Rock'n'Roll Band. And
yeah, he's over at the Pavilion over in Birkenhead.
Yeah.
New Brighton.
Yeah. So, I mean, he has been active ever since.
Yeah.
I mean, when Wizzard finished, he formed another band. I mean, Wizzard, well, fall apart is a bit of a strong thing. I mean, you know, most bands come to a natural end, and Wizzard met its demise in early 75. And then he had another very brief, short-lived band called the Wizzo band that apparently only played one gig. It's about 77. They did have a UK tour lined up, but I think that, you know, they never really quite got it all together, and that tour never came off. But you know, he's had solo albums as well. I mean, the Wizzard hits went very much in the first half of the 1970s, and of course, you mentioned earlier about the way he dressed, the flamboyancy, and all the rest of it. If flamboyancy is a word, flamboyant certainly is. But it was the glam rock era, of course. I mean, Wizzard really coincides with very much T-Rex and David Bowie, and and Slade. You know, he was very much part of that very, very colourful clothing, very brash kind of early 70s era. So again, you know, that suited him nicely. He just capitalised on it. He had a solo album in 73, and if you read the credits, it's great. It says, all instruments and voices by Roy Wood. You know, it sort of sums it, and he produced the album as well.
Wow.
You know, he may even have designed the sleeve. I couldn't find a credit for that. But, you know, I mean, the guy is just an all-rounder, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. You don't see many like it. You just don't see them at all. Not for like forming bands and making hits out of those bands as well, if you know what I mean, and being in them. And yeah, he's still revered today. Roy Wood. Is it true that I'm going back years ago, and I don't know whether I read it or someone said it, you know, I don't mean in the pub or anything, that Elvis Presley wanted Roy Wood to write songs for him.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I think that might well be the case. I think one of the things about Elvis is, though, of course, is the person who made those sort of decisions was very much the Colonel.
Yeah.
Elvis had a big falling out with, well, not so much a falling out, as Elvis got on really well with Lieber and Stoller, people who wrote a whole load of stuff. Well, still do. Well, I'm not sure about still do, but certainly, across the decades, they've had so many hit records. They wrote a lot of Elvis's stuff. But Elvis got very close to them, to the fact that he was actually dealing with them and talking to them about recordings and songs. And the Colonel really didn't like this. So he effectively put a wall himself, as a wall between Lieber and Stoller and Elvis, which is why the classic Elvis, Lieber and Stoller is all in the very early days. And there are one or two movie songs that come from Lieber and Stoller. But, had they not fallen out, I mean, Elvis would have had so many more great Lieber and Stoller songs.
Here's an interesting question, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
From Brian Edley. Is it true, lads, that Elvis once stopped off at a remote Scottish airport on a stopover and started singing to the girls working there? Any truth in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what it was, he was coming back from, he'd just been demobbed. Well, technically not demobbed. He was just about to be demobbed back in America. He'd spent 18 months or so, effectively national service in Germany. And flying back, they stopped off at Prestwick to refuel, I think. So he very briefly stood on British soil, and that technically
it was Stansted. I always thought it was Stansted.
No, it was Prestwick.
Prestwick, was it?
It was Prestwick, yeah, to sort of borders country. And yeah, but apparently, the word locally quickly got out that Elvis Presley was there. So, the local girls, sort of as many as soon as they could, made their way there. And he was signing autographs, and I can imagine he was singing as well. Because I mean, the one thing
you'd do that, wouldn't you? Knowing Elvis, like, because Elvis used to poke fun at himself, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. You've only got to watch the Vegas concert, particularly the later ones, after he put on a little bit of weight. Yeah. And he still had enormous charisma. And the fans still absolutely adored him. And you're absolutely right. He used to poke fun at himself all the time. He'd forget the words from time to time. The famous, "Are you lonesome tonight?" Yeah. When he just made the words up as he went along.
Yeah, he improvised, didn't he? Did you ever see him? It was just on like I don't know whether it was a rectangle or a circle stage, but it wasn't that big.
Yeah.
And he was dressed all in leather, black leather.
Yeah, that was the farewell. That was the comeback NBC famous comeback concert in TV program in 1968. And he was on and it was the first time he'd actually performed in front of an audience since the beginning of the decade.
That's brilliant, because he was poking fun at his lip. He's just poking fun at him, and he's forgetting his words as well.
Yeah.
But that was the enigma of Elvis Presley, wasn't it? That was the man. And someone mentioned something there. Charlie Wood says Elvis wanted to work with writers to give him co-writing credits. Any idea on that?
Well, I know that in particularly in the early days, but not just the early days, it wasn't so much Elvis. I think that was more the Colonel, because the real money that's made, it goes to the writer. I don't know the percentage, but they get best part of 50%. The artist gets about 2 or 5% if they're lucky. The record store gets 30 or 40% or whatever. But the writer, I mean, where you make money in rock and roll is by writing material. If you write and sing it, your quid's in. And what the Colonel would do, sometimes he would insist that if a songwriter wanted Elvis to record his song, Elvis would be put on the writing credit for exactly that reason. And I'm really trying to think. There's a famous example of somebody, I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was Neil Diamond, but it was somebody like that. And he refused to give Elvis this song. And again, it was then recorded by somebody else, and it's a massive hit. For the life of me, I can't recall it. I will as soon as I disappeared. But but yeah, that was very much the Colonel. In fact, Elvis famously said that he's credited with loads of songwriting credits, but he never wrote a song in his life.
Well, Brian actually says, when he mentions about Scotland, he says, "That's brilliant, that, lads. I was telling a Scottish girl this in work ages ago, and she said it was nonsense." Years, man. That's good. And Mark Kinney says, apparently Elvis did say he wanted to tour in the UK, but the Colonel wouldn't let him. And Brian says, did he ever have a desire to play in Europe?
Oh, very much so. I mean, he would have left to his own devices, or if the Colonel hadn't, been adamant that he wasn't going to tour, Elvis would like to have toured. I don't think it would have made him any more famous or whatever. And the Colonel's idea was let the world come to Elvis. Well, and this is exactly what happened. I mean, those days particularly, I mean, in the 60s and 70s, bands lost money. They made the money on the albums. They toured to promote the albums, and they'd lose money on the tours. So, in a lot of ways, from a business point of view, very shrewd of the Colonel, the whole Vegas thing, because the accommodation was free, the tour was free. Once the roadies had actually set it up, it was 6 weeks before they needed to come in again to load out. And
do you think like the likes of the Beatles lost money touring? I
wouldn't think they made a lot of money out of touring. I mean, tours were starting to get into the stadiums, and you must make a bit more money if you're playing to 20,000 rather than 2,000 people. But certainly, in that era, you made your money out of your LPs and you made your money out of your singles. I mean, people.
When I went to the stadium, Liverpool Boxing Stadium, to see Mott the Hoople and Hawkwind.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it before. I didn't know who they were. Queen was the supporting group.
Yes.
And when you look at them, you're talking Hawkwind, you're talking Mott the Hoople. Yeah. And that was a great story about David Bowie. Brilliant, that, absolutely brilliant. And Queen, they mustn't have made anything that nice. It was all up, it was shocking. But they mustn't have made anything.
No.
They mustn't have done. But for the fans,
Yeah.
As we were then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really big differences between today's music scene and the music scene of the sort of particularly 60s and early 70s and stuff. Now, it's very much the tours where people are making vast amounts of money. And, well, the likes of Spotify, if you're one of these people who has multi-billion, trillion hits, you can make a lot of money, but sadly for, I don't know what percentage is, 60, 70, 80, 90% of musicians probably aren't making an awful lot of money out of downloads. And the thing is now, so many people download odd tracks. I mean, rather than the whole concept of an album that somebody's, thought about, put together in a certain order and all the rest of it. And now you're back to almost a singles market again, where people just pick on a particular song, and there's no context.
Well, there's some interesting comments here. I'll just go through them before you go. Artie Davis says the Colonel wouldn't leave the USA because he was an illegal immigrant. Yeah. So if he left the States, he wouldn't get back in.
That's right.
Neil Broderick says Elvis was trapped in Vegas purely because of gambling debts. Now, I want you to get back to that. The Beatles couldn't even air themselves while on tour in the 60s, says Mark Kinney. Lads, was George Harrison's album a big hit? I'm sure it was, but did it hit the heights that George would have been looking for? And Derek, do you remember, that's Brian Edley said that about George Harrison. Mark Kinnish says, do you remember a band in the 70s? I don't know what he's called Sweet.
Oh, Sweet, yeah, Ballroom Blitz and all that.
Oh, man,
that was very much the whole glam thing, yeah.
From the run, yes. It was a glam lockdown. Anyway, Orquin's Lemmy went on to create Motorhead, says Neil Broderick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Charlie Wood says, kids don't know the fun of listening to albums from start to finish. That's a good point,
oh,
isn't
absolutely.
it?
Absolutely.
So, you know, what Neil Broderick says there is, Elvis was trapped in Vegas purely because of gambling debt.
Well, the Colonel's well-known inveterate gambler. He would lose $100,000 in a night. He'd make $100,000 some nights. But the thing was, he was gambling in the casinos that Elvis was playing in, so he was very much offsetting the debts, and I think his credit was pretty good. I mean, the thing about the Colonel was he revolutionized a lot of aspects of rock and roll with Elvis. I mean, the model that the Colonel had with Elvis for Vegas was the model for Vegas acts after that. I mean, before Elvis, Vegas was just a Butlins, basically. It was a turn that was on at the hotel to bring people in to gamble, to have a meal. But it was just basically a cabaret act. And also merchandising. He really introduced merchandising into the rock and roll world. And what's great, he even had a badge that said, I hate Elvis. I hate Elvis badge. So he was making money out of people who didn't like Elvis. You know, I mean, the guy had a sort of circus background. You know, he was a roustabout, I think the Americans call them. And you know, he just had a flair. I mean, he managed people like Eddie Arnold, when Eddie Arnold in his early career, Tommy Sands. He was Tommy Sands' first.
Go away.
Yeah, in fact, funny enough, I've just done a thing about Tommy Sands. Tommy Sands.
Would you do that? Would you do that? Because I want to know about Tommy Sands, because he was married to Nancy Sinatra.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, Nancy Sinatra, you know, there must have been something gone on because you never ever heard of him. Now, don't forget, Frank was the man.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Would you do it? Would you? Not now. Well, I've got to finish, unfortunately. Would you do him?
Yeah. We can have a look at Tommy
Sands.
Sands.
Absolutely brilliant. Tommy Sands. Now, half of these won't remember. I think. No. Oh, brilliant. Artie Davis says, let me start as a lead guitarist in the Rockin' Vickers in Blackpool. The Rockin' Vickers. G-Vicker. Oh, brilliant. Could you imagine Lemmy, the Rockin' Vickers? Teresa Maria Fitzgerald, even a Frank Derrick, and all the guests. Thank you. 3 kisses for Frank. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you. Didn't Elvis give a homeless lad a car, Derek? Think you told it? Yeah, he did, Brian. He did. He wasn't homeless. He just gave him a lift and he said, "Yeah, you can have it." Yeah. Tom Jones was big in Vegas and a great friend of Elvis, says Neil Broderick. And Mark Innes, was it true, Derek, that there was tension between John Lennon and Elvis? Right, I've got to end it there. Derek, that was brilliant.
Thanks. I enjoyed it.
I've got to do the 80th anniversary of and a few other historical things. So will you do that for us? You know, Tommy Sands. That would be fascinating. That would be fascinating, because all of a sudden Tommy Sands was there making a film. You know, he's one of these like young stars, up and coming stars of Hollywood, and the music, everything. Then all of a sudden, want to know about that? That'll be fantastic. Derek, thank you so much.
My pleasure, mate.
See you in a week or two, eh? Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah, it'll be brilliant. Look
Cheers.
forward to it.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Derek.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, everybody.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Derek.